Welcome to our final class for yoga, hype, and history. This is it. It's all over. It's always my tradition to kind of like dress in my normal clothes. So this is what I look like. I'm wearing a sweatshirt and a t-shirt. Now, I always like to chuckle to my students, like, if you encountered me, drinking a beer in a bar, this is what I look like if you were to run into me. So today we are going to conclude by talking about yoga these days and talk a little bit about race in yoga, which I think is really interesting. And there's only a little bit of research on the topic. But we're reading Amanda Lucia's wonderful book, White Utopias, that really goes into the details here. So let's get started. Okay. We're closing down yoga hype in history, which means we have to once again ask this question of what is yoga? And also note the transformation of, yoga being done by these hatha yogis in India to yoga as it's practiced today, predominantly by white women. So we have to ask ourselves, what is yoga? What does it mean to be a yoga teacher? What does it mean for yoga to be real or for yoga to be authentic? Who can teach yoga and who studies yoga and why? Well, this time we're actually going to dig into this notion of race a bit. Now, we have been talking quite a bit about South Asians or Indians. So namely everything we studied about the subcontinent or the subcontinent of the Indian subcontinent in the Indian Ocean. And in the 20th century, most of the big gurus who came to the United States were South Asian. This is important because their race signaled an inherent claim for authority. By being from India, they were considered inherently authentic. Or as White argued with Vivekananda wrote the world's first self-help book using a whole bunch of Western ideas and cloaking them as being from India and being this thing about yoga, which made them inherently more authentic for people, even if Vivekananda was actually really borrowing from a lot of Western and modern ideas. So let us remember that being South Asian is a racial category, not just a geographic origin. And if you get into India, people will talk about race there, and South Indians and North Indians even being considered different races and different, they'll talk about sub-ethnicities within India. But it's clear, even though race is entirely a made-up thing, that people think about being Indian as a racial category. Especially in the US, South Asians were actually in the United States, were really heavy laborers until the 20th century. So they were working more like menial labor type jobs. But in the late 20th century, immigration policies changed, and the majority of Indians who came to the United States were educated elites and mostly Brahmins. So you get a shift from Indians coming to the United States to work as shopkeepers and factory workers and working, especially in California, working in the agricultural industry, to the Indians today who come who are more elites, your doctors and your engineers. That's been a real shift. In this way, Asians and South Asians have functioned as model minorities. If you want to read more about this, take a look at Vijay Prasad, who wrote a wonderful book called The Karma of Brown Folk. So in post-lineage yoga or post-guru yoga, today, the majority of teachers are not Indian, however. Arguably, the majority of them have never traveled to India, nor have they studied with Indians. So what does it mean to be a non-Indian person who's a yoga teacher? What does it mean to be a white identifying yoga teacher? Is there a different authenticity for a person teaching yoga who is neither white nor Indian? Perhaps we won't be able to answer that right now, but it's worth thinking about. So we're going to take a look at this wonderful book by Amanda Lucia called White Utopias, the Religious Exoticism of Transformational Festivals as a contribution, and we're looking at this as a contribution to the study of modern yoga. Like Daniela Bevilacqua, she is doing anthropology, using ethnography to think about race and to think about yoga. Her work is a major contribution to the field of contemporary yoga studies. Contrast, I would think, and when I was reading this book, I was thinking about that documentary I had assigned as being optional about James Mallinson and Dominic West, how they went to the Kumbh Mela in one year. And that was the year that that Jim Mallinson was actually granted the status of a Mahant in the yogi order that he's a part of. So look at the festival of the Kumbh Mela, the gathering around the big pot, in comparison to the ways she describes people hanging out in these transformational photos and these transformational festivals today, which is pretty darn different. So the context of her ethnography is different from other ethnographies we've looked at, especially, say, Bevilacqua doing the ethnography of the Hatha yogis. She attends these large transformational festivals with thousands of people that come to study yoga, in addition to just coming together for these festivals. And she notes that there's an awful lot of yoga at these different festivals. Now, why do people come to these festivals? Well, they come to these festivals to transform themselves and to experience a type of utopia, for that matter. So what are some of these activities? You have Shakti Fest, Bhakti Fest, Lightning a Bottle, and even Burning Man. Here we see people doing yoga to some degree at Burning Man. I don't know who's leading them in this, but I don't know. It just looks hot, dusty, and unpleasant. But that's me. I don't want to go Burning Man. All right, so Lucia argues that the common link between these festivals is a similar utopian ideal. So what does utopia mean? Well, utopia means a no place. So let me say that again. Lucia argues the common link between these festivals is a similar utopian vision with a commitment shared to personal and social transformation. And that transformation is thought to be brought about by reformulating everyday practices. You go to these festivals, you experience this alternate society, and you come back different. You come back changed, and you are able to transform yourself and have different daily habits. So the word utopia means no place. It was used first in a French novel called Utopia to set out an ideal world. But part of writing about a utopia is realizing that it is impossible. It is a no place. It's not even an ideal place. It's a place that can't actually happen. Utopia is often contrasted with dystopia. Think about the great dystopic novels of our times. I suppose the best one that everybody would know is The Hunger Games. All right, so people go to these festivals to experience a different way of being and explore different ways of being, and having a goal to take away knowledge and experiences that will transform the self forever. And these transformations are thought to happen to everyday life. If you talk to anybody after they come back from, say, Burning Man, they get really idealistic. Like, what if we lived in a barter economy? What if we lived like Burning Man all the time? The idea of going to one of these festivals is to come back to the world after you've gone to this utopia and to live your life differently based on the experiences that you've had there. So there are things that go on there that are yoga and yoga adjacent. Now, when I say yoga adjacent, I mean stuff at these festivals that are like healing and massage, new age type stuff, vague neo-paganism, Reiki, massage, organic eating, and the like. She notes that even at these festivals, there are Native American singing and Tibetan singing bowls. However, Tibetan singing bowls are only since the 1960s. They're not that old. That's part of the commodification of Tibet. And Native Americans singing around a bunch of white people out in the desert is kind of weird when you really think about it. She really immerses herself in this very white and very culturally privileged set of spaces. Remember that privilege is not just about wealth. Privilege, I thought I had a slide on this. Privilege and white privilege is not just about wealth. Privilege is about access. So to attend such a festival, you must have the freedom of life and independence to be able to just take off and go. You got to have money to get there. You have to have the ability to travel and the physical abilities to attend such places. You have to be physically able to do it. So there's a level of privilege in being able to go to any of these festivals. I always note that my friends that go to Burning Man spend weeks gathering together all sorts of goods and their tents and their costumes and whatnot, and spending colossal amounts of money to go out into the desert and engage in a barter economy where there is no money. But it takes a colossal amount of money to get to the point that you can live in a world without money for a couple of weeks. So yoga teachers and students, she finds, are obsessed with questions of authenticity. Clearly, there's a tension since there are so many different types of yoga, but it also has to do with the ideals for a pre-modern, authentic way of being. So they graft onto yoga these ideas of an authentic life that they say is in India. So they'll often, you can hear yoga teachers and yoga students think about this. Oh, if only I could practice with the great masters. Oh, if only I could live this authentic yoga lifestyle the way that we were supposed to be originally. So you're practicing this 20th century exercise, arguably fad, that in fact calls you back to the ideal way of being, an ideal way of being that you've never actually experienced yourself. So these worries about authenticity also come from this racial component. If you're sitting in a room of white people doing stuff that comes from a brown culture, arguably India, there's a sense of tension. How can we do what we do? How is yoga a thing that's okay for us to do if we're not from the culture from which this place originates? So these days we have a great notion of these days our very notion of authenticity is hard to grasp because we don't have traditional authorities in the way that we did, say, even a couple hundred years ago. I'm going to come back to this point in a second. So authority and anxiety. So I've often talked about authority, being authoritative, and authenticity, or being authentic. I think we're all stuck trying to figure out what is authentic. And I don't know if there's a solution to what is authentic and what is authoritative. It's not up to really posit an answer. It's to look for our concerns about authenticity and authority. I mean, what is truth in general? The political world in our contemporary time is really focused on labeling things as fake news, as speaking one's own truth, or as Stephen Colbert used to joke about, something not being true, but it's truthy. It has a truthiness about it. And I think this is part of our anxiety about what is real, what is true, or what is authentic. I don't think that the quest for authenticity is a fruitful one, but we need to look at how we try to deploy these ideas of authenticity. What is real yoga? What does it mean to be a real yoga teacher? What does it mean to have a real yoga system? And again, this is crazy in the fact that all of this discussion of real yoga, it didn't exist before Pattabhi Jois and Krishnamacharya and Iyengar in the early 20th century. So we're always asking, what is the real yoga? And I feel like people are always saying, what is the real yoga as it was practiced 2,000 years ago? Well, there was no yoga practiced 2,000 years ago. Anything that we see that looks like yoga today didn't look like what people were doing that was called yoga back then, which would have been people doing a lot of like meditation. It wouldn't have been doing a lot of bendy bodies and weird body strip positions. However, if you look back into the history of archaeology, for instance, and art history, we do see people doing kind of wacky yoga poses. But it's hard to say if they would have even called those poses yoga themselves. To some degree, they would have been contortionists. Others of them would have been doing yoga as hatha yogis, and they would have been doing it in context of supporting their meditation. But just because you see someone in an artistic depiction doing something that looks like yoga doesn't mean it's yoga. For all we know, it could have been a style of dance that we've lost over the years in India. Okay, so someone can be an authority. So like I am an authority on yoga now, and someone can speak with authority. I speak with authority because I have a PhD. I've done the training because I've read 1,000 books, blah, 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 blah. So think about how these things are different, to be an authority and to speak with authority. A yoga guru is definitely an authority on yoga. So thinking of like people like Krishnamacharya, but a guru can have a scandal and they can lose that status like John Friend did, or as Bikram kind of did. So a student of, say, Pattabhi Jois is thought to speak with the authority of Jois and Krishnamacharya when they teach. They're thought to have that tradition. They're speaking with the authority of that organization. But what about someone who's teaching yoga and doesn't have this type of guru? What about somebody who just learned yoga through going to various yoga studios at some point? Well, most yoga teachers these days have some sort of yoga certification via studying intensively in a yoga teacher certification program. In fact, there is no universal form of yoga certification. There is no universal set of qualifications or credentials for yoga teachers, though there are people in organizations like Yoga Alliance that are trying to make a universalized certification system for yogis and for people teaching yoga. So you have these certifications, like you can have here, I have on the right, a certificate of training through this Ashtanga Vinyasa and depth studies and yoga teachers training with this Dorian yoga group. So that's kind of interesting. However, when we look at Ashtanga yoga and we look at Patabi Joyce, we'd see that there was no certification program. You just had to every 18 months go spend a month in Mysore studying with Patabi Joyce. And once Patabi Joyce thought you were ready, it'd say, okay, you're ready to go and teach. So one of my other concerns is it's unclear if any of these certifications are consistent. Some yoga teacher certifications teach anatomy and basic medicine, which I think is essential. And some are just doing a lot of yoga and learning to adjust people. So what does a certification really mean? It usually means that you've had like 200 hours of training with a yoga teacher. Well, what if that yoga teacher was crap? I mean, you don't know, but they have the certificate on your board. It's on their wall. It's not like, you got a medical doctorate degree. Okay, so one of the interesting things for me in thinking about the yoga gurus and yoga teachers today is none of these yoga gurus were ever from India, were ever certified to teach yoga. They just started doing it and people revered them, and the next thing you know, they were yoga gurus. So this anxiety in general over authenticity is reflected in our general neoliberal sort of postmodern state of being anxious about authority. We don't have the authority of the church or the university or the king that were unquestioned authorities. We don't have unquestioned authorities these days. We don't have a sense of universal faith, meaning, or truth, such as we used to have out of religion, say in the medieval era. So how can we assert that any one of this or one of that is true or authoritative? We have so many multiple worldviews, and there's no single religious truth as we had in the past. Religion was ultimately the source of meaning in the past. We don't have any barometer for truth at the moment. So these days, Lucia argues, we take our personal experiences to be the arbiters of authority and experience, or of authority and truth. The experience of the yoga class and with the teacher that establishes authority and authenticity of the yoga tradition is what happens. You have to, it's your experience of the teacher and of the class and of this style of yoga being effective that becomes what you use, what an individual uses to judge something to be authentic or true. This is a different phrase. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible told me so. Scripture tells me it's true. In this sense, and this is very much, I would say, consistent with our general worldview these days, is that I know something to be true because I have experienced it. My father will always say, I have a cognitive experience of that. So we really do kind of decide what is real and what is not real by how it feels to us, not by any verifiable truth. So this is kind of weird when you think about science. So science, we know something in science to be true because an experiment can be verified by an external group that does the same experiment and finds the findings to be consistent or inconsistent. So that's how you find the truth. But how do you know the truth of a political position? Well, you could say, well, in my experience, blah, blah, blah. Listen to how much people say, in my experience, I know this to be true because of something I experienced. So the experience of the yoga class and with the teacher, that personal experience, is what establishes authority and authenticity of a yoga tradition. I would argue also that medical and scientific knowledge about the therapeutics of yoga create a sense of authenticity. This is something we didn't get into enough in class, but I've talked about quite a bit, that these days the authority of yoga is whether there are scientifically verifiable studies that say, oh yeah, this stuff works. I would also argue that celebrities doing yoga and showing off their toned bodies are a sense of authenticity. The proof is in the pudding, as one of my teachers used to always say. So if you look and you see, oh yeah, well, Willem Dafoe, look at his powerful, potent body, and look at how skinny he is, and look how great he looks at his advanced age. Well, clearly he's been doing yoga, and he has. Willem Dafoe's been doing yoga for like 30 years, Ashtanga style yoga. A friend of mine was in a yoga class with him, and she was like, he's really good at that. So, we look at these celebrity figures and go, wow, look at how healthy they are. So clearly yoga works. In this sense, there is an authenticity found in appearance in the yoga community. And it's really, are they skinny? Are they wealthy? Are they wise? And maybe, are they white? So Christopher Miller, who's a pretty great yoga scholar, I met him the other weekend, says, in our current moment, the dominant construction of the authentic yoga body is not just visibly thin, affluent, white, female, and capable of biomechanically complex gestures, but also a body that is toned, firm, and graceful, with particular eating habits and fashion choices. Are you wearing the right yoga leggings? Are you dressed properly, yoga mom? With particular eating habits, are you a vegan, and fashion choices? Are you paleo? It is constructed as a higher class body that is contained and that does not fart or burp in public, even during postures that promote better digestion. So, yes, I think this is a really key point. The ideal yoga body is disembodied. It's like this ideal body that doesn't do things like pass gas or burp or vomit or poop. It's like the body is so refined through yoga that it is a celestial, almost a heavenly body, if you will. The voice of the authentic yoga body is soothing, calm, and measured, and expectations so common that many new teachers feel pressured to adopt what trainers in certification programs often explicitly warn against inadvertently as changing one's vocal style. You can hear the yoga teacher doing that. The yoga voice does not sound like my voice. No, the yoga voice sounds, and then you will be moving into the downward facing dog from the salutation of the sun. And now we will rest in the corpse pose or shavasana, but don't think of yourself as dead in the corpse pose, but exploring a new life that you're reborn to after every yoga class. Gives me the heebie-jeebies. Okay, so I would argue, in fact, that the bodies of such yoga figures as Joyce, Krishnamacharya, and Iyengar, or even Bikram, function as signs of authority. The proof is in the pudding. You saw that they were strong, that they lived long lives, that they were lean. However, these yoga gurus like Patabi Joyce and Krishnamacharya and Iyengar, that was a masculine ideal. It was an ideal of yoga in the old days, of the Hatha yogi or the yoga strongman. Whereas our ideal now of the yoga strong person is, I would argue, actually on the older side, female and white. Think about how everybody looks at Madonna every time she reinvents herself again. Says, oh, that yoga is really working. So I would argue, I would note that some yoga aspirants, people who really are doing yoga, will go to India to study with famous yoga gurus. But unlike the fantasies of old, they go to a yoga studio. They don't wander into the darkness or wander into the jungle looking for an authentic yogi mystic. So whiteness is a funny thing. Being white allows an incredible amount of access to everything, really. And if you don't realize this, white person, ask any brown person you know. Ask them what it's like to be a white person. The surprise will be impressive. So when I go to India, my access is astounding. I can go anywhere. I can be dressed in ratty clothes and show up like at a business meeting, and people will be like, oh, hey, the white guy's here. That's great. There's a prestige to whiteness. That's changed in India, but it was definitely the case like in 1999 when I went. These days, it's not just enough to be white in India. You have to be wealthy and successful and white. But in general, you can go into any place. So white folk in general are particular. So one of the things that I want to bring up about this is that ease of access is what and that ease of movement is what allows white people to culturally appropriate so easily. So there's no problem with, oh, I can speak in Black English. Oh, I can do yoga because I'm a white person. I can do anything. It should be okay for me to use the N-word. I should be allowed to use all words at all times. Whereas to be a person of color, especially in the United States, is to be not allowed in a lot of spaces or to be very uncomfortable in a lot of spaces. So for the white person, it becomes almost like this incredible notion of the sovereign individual. I can do all things. I deserve to go all places. I can go any place as long as I have the cash. I should be able to do all of these things, which is not the experience of a person of color who feels restriction in a lot of places people go. And this becomes intriguing to me because white people are particularly irritated by being shut out of access to places where they feel they deserve. At a crass level, they say they should be able to say the N-word. They should be able to say anything they want or be able to go into any neighborhood. If a brown guy walks into a white neighborhood, there are immediate consequences, sometimes lethal. But they also feel like they should have access to all religious things. So I often meet white people who are furious that they can't enter certain temples in India. Now, I must admit, I can usually get into those temples. With a shaved head, speaking Hindi, with a big mustache and an Indian dress, I can pass enough for Indian, even though I don't look Indian at all, that I can often get into those places. But I'll regularly meet white folks that are just like, I can't believe they won't let me into that temple. I want to see the beauty. Access to the goddess should be given to everyone. I'm like, no, this isn't your culture. You're not from here. If they say you can't go in, you can't go in. So do I sneak my way into temples? Some of them where they kick white people out for being goofy. There's one temple that I absolutely adore and I've never been in and will never try to go in because it is not open to non-Hindus. And me as a white person is equivalent to me being a Muslim. I'm a non-Hindu. I wasn't born into Hindu culture. And in that place, in Puri, the temple of Jagannath, I go and I just hang out. I hang out outside the temple. I go to the little temples around it. And I know I'll never go into that temple, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. It's okay for you to say, look, no white guys allowed in this thing because it's complicated. It has to do with, one, the history of the British, two, the sense of people being from a foreign land and being not Hindu bring a sense of impurity to the temple. So my very presence would defile the temple. If that's the argument, I don't want to go in. I love that temple too much to try to weasel my way in. Okay, so Western culture is kind of funny. When you get to, yeah, I feel like my slides got a little screwy. Okay, so what we were talking about before is, and this is what Lucia sets out, is she talks about knowledge being local and universal. So local knowledge in regard to yoga refers to teachers who build their authenticity based on lineage and connections to traditions. The local part is about India and about blah blah. Sorry, my phone was just going crazy. I forgot to turn it off. Local knowledge in regard to yoga refers to teachers who build their authenticity based on their lineage and connections to traditions in India. The local part is really about India, about being in India, about getting knowledge from India. The thing is that most teachers of yoga who claim local knowledge are in fact white. So most yoga teachers in general are white, but they maintain connections to an Indian guru or tradition. Others will claim local knowledge due to general experiences in India, especially with bhakti or devotionalism. They might take up Indian names and wear Indian clothes and go to regular spiritual gatherings in India. But the India that they go to is not the modern culture of India that you see all around, but it's in fact a sort of playground for romantic fantasy. When I first came back from India in the 90s, I had a Shakespeare teacher who was Indian who said to the whole class, it's like, this one over here, he believes in this new age India of mysticism and magic. That India doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, well, excuse me, I just spent 3 months in that crazy mystic India. But in a way now I get what she meant. The romantic ideals of India are kind of destroyed by experiencing the reality of India, which is of a hyper-capitalistic, go-go culture that also has a lot of problems. Now, for me, mystic India of gurus and magic, that still exists, but it's a part of modern India. And that's because my romantic India notions of India were steadily replaced by actual experiences of India. And I actually think India in and of itself is quite a bit greater than romantic notions of India. Okay, so they have ideas like Western culture, or hold on. So I even know a guru figure, in fact, a white guru figure, who leads trips to spiritual India. And he recently said that his trips to India give all the good of India without the bad. And he also recently said that he doesn't think he's going to do this anymore because India has changed so much. Well, I would say change with India. If your spiritual ideals are no longer found in India, maybe that's because the spiritual ideals were never found in India. So India, as it modernized, does not maintain its fantasies of the past. Now, a lot of these yoga folks see Western culture as inauthentic and India itself as authentic. This is the same as those early Indologists and Indian romanticists that were described in white. Their followers and students perpetuate these claims to authenticity by a romantic vision of India. The yoga world is filled with Indophiles, people who love India. Lucia writes, for example, when Gwyneth Paltrow came to the University of Chicago to film the movie Proof in 2005, she surprised my Sanskrit class by reciting portions of the Yoga Sutra in Sanskrit from memory. At the time, Paltrow was the frequent target of cultural appropriation criticism and a media exemplar of celebrities who were superficially dabbling in India. And she was chastised alongside Madonna, Sting, and Julia Roberts. But Madonna still includes yoga in her daily workout routines. Julia Roberts is a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba, out in Taos, but originally from northern India. And Gwyneth Paltrow can recite Yoga Sutras in Sanskrit. So then, what is it exactly that they're being critiqued for, other than their whiteness? They're being critiqued, I would argue, because they are not Indian. They are not local to this knowledge that they claim. That said, is there not a value, as Wendy Doniger argues, to just learning about other cultures? Isn't it good to learn about other cultures and growing through that encounter? The dilemma is we have a discomfort when local knowledges get consumed by non-locals. And when those non-locals claim authority, it can injure those local cultures. It's tricky when there is a homogeneous white space that is expressing other cultures. Now, there are problems here. Lucia argues that in an all-white space, white people may be comfortable defending the N-word. They wouldn't if there was a black person there. That's fine. That's a standard argument. She also argues that calling Indians inherently spiritual would not be comfortable for Indian atheists and engineers. I think that's wrong, in fact, because a lot of the Hindu engineers I know are just as mystically and religiously inclined as anybody else. India doesn't have a problem with modernizing and still being religious. So as technology grows, Indians only see Hinduism as being more valuable. So she has this notion that I found in one quote by her that was like, no, maybe people wouldn't talk about Indians as being inherently spiritual if they had a bunch of Indian atheists and engineers there. I'm like, well, a lot of Indian engineers are pretty religious and pretty spiritual people in my experience. They're not like Western engineers. So in a positive way, this claim of authority based on local knowledge does show solidarity with India and Indians. Now, my first teacher, John Grimes, was a white guy who was married to an Indian woman and lived in India for a long time. He lives in India now. He was asked at one point in his Hinduism class, why are we so interested in India for studying Hinduism? And he looked and he said, well, think of it this way. If you're interested in gold, where's one place you can find it? You can go to Fort Knox. Fort Knox in the United States is where the U.S. Gold Depository is. So if you want to learn about gold, or if you want to get gold, you go to Fort Knox. So the point is, why India? Because there's so much glorious stuff there. Why are we interested in yoga or in India when talking about yoga? Because yoga kind of does come from there. So then you have a notion of universal knowledge as opposed to local knowledge. Now, universal knowledge is the argument that authority comes from the personal self and that wellness and spirituality are universal to all people and all contexts. This is the sort of depictions of yoga that Vivekananda would make, and that many contemporary yogis and Hindus will make about yoga and Hindu ideals. Authority is experiential. The big authority is the intuitive truth of the yoga practitioner and the teacher. Some will argue that India is just too crazy and not spiritual enough now, and that the important thing is to just do the practice and make the gains within one's own self. So it doesn't matter if you understand the history of yoga or the Indian context of yoga, they would argue. What's important is that you do yoga and you get gains from it. It's all about the gains. It's all about the gains. My bodybuilder friend's always like, gains, gains, gains. I'm like, I'm watching you drink heavy cream. He's like, it's all about the gains. Which always cracks me up. All right. We note that the people that are saying that the key to yoga is the experience of yoga will note that these are the people that usually make innovations themselves. They also note that just as the founders of modern postural yoga were always experimenting, Krishnamacharya was making crap up all the time, so can they. The key is effectiveness, not any lineage or doing things in the received way or in the Indian way. This reliance on experience, by and large, has replaced the sort of devotion people had for guru in the 1960s and onward. We don't see yoga gurus in the same way now. The ideals are an open heart, love, light, truth, God, presence, and so forth. They want to live an authentic life. There's that word again, authenticity. Some of this dovetails with neo-Hinduism, but all really, to me, sounds like the harmonial religious themes that were brought up by Foxen throughout her work that we looked at. Some will also lean on a postmodern understanding of relativism. There's no need for any type of authority, just the experience of good ends and finding one's own truth. The problem here is that it runs roughshod over the prior traditions of Indian yoga and the Indian claims on yoga. It also culturally appropriates. It says, all that stuff, I can do it, it's mine. It also justifies white privilege. It also is unregulated so that you can have an explosion of innovations. They can go in all sorts of directions all at once. All right. So, and this question is, why India? Why should you be interested in India? Because wisdom is everywhere, but the India thing is a great method to get there. So one of these universal knowledge people would say, I experience the entire truth, but I should go to India to see where people have figured out the truth better in ways that can teach me how to experience the truth that I can get on my own. In this, what is a guru? Spell it out. G, you are you. G, you are you, as a friend of mine said, who's now in prison. Okay, translation and new traditions. We're getting to the end of the class here. Anxiety over authenticity is especially apparent because we are actively watching new traditions, or even a singular new tradition of yoga that's being formed in the West, in English-speaking places. The post-lineage world without yoga gurus the world is post-lineage, but it still leans on nods to lineage. So while we're seeing a lot of innovations, people still lean back to people like Krishnamacharya and Iyengar. The very notion of a guru or an instructor is shifting from the Indian guru to the technocrat, to the one who really knows yoga. Who do you go to a yoga teacher? Why do you go to a yoga teacher? You go to a yoga teacher because the yoga teacher is really good at doing yoga, not because they have a lineage, not because they have a special set of sequences that nobody has figured out before they learned in a mountain from a mystic yogi. Now, there's a thing called translation theory, which is about how to get your source language into a target language. I think this is a good metaphor here. This is applicable. Hold on one second. My battery almost fell out. Okay, so translation theory, you go from your source language to your target language. This is applicable as we think about, say, Krishnamacharya's style versus the yoga studio down the block. If Krishnamacharya is the source language, then our target language is the yoga studio down the block. Think about the way that John Friend translated two forms of yoga, namely Siddha Yoga and Iyengar Yoga, and turned it into something new, which was this Anusara Yoga. Was he purely translating the yogas into a new context, or was he creating a new tradition as an author? Is he a translator or an author? How do we balance translation and innovations? Do we really need to go back to the earliest forms of yoga and show a connection to them? I don't know. I kind of think we do. So what does it mean to do or be authentically yoga? Is it old or is it new? I'm not sure I can generally argue about translating or authoring. All transmission seems to be about adaptation and innovation. So finally, here we are at the end of the class. What are my final thoughts I hope for you to take away from this? First off, modern postural yoga is thoroughly Indian and thoroughly Western as a physical culture. What's a physical culture? We learned this from Singleton, but it's a culture about moving the body for personal betterment. But that physical culture continually calls back to Indian ideals and Indian scripture, even if those ideals are not historically accurate or the scriptures are improperly understood. So modern postural yoga is rooted in Western physical culture and Indian innovations and thoughts about yoga from the past of India. It's important to always remember that. Even if those ideals in India or about India were incorrect or the scriptures were improperly understood, we do need to see the roots of yoga being in India. We also need to see the roots of yoga being about an Indian encounter with Western physical culture. Now, I've come to develop this argument about yoga is that it is a tradition of experimentation using the mind and body to perfect or optimize the mind and body. It depends on what you mean by mind and body and optimize and perfect to really understand that. But it's a tradition of experimentation to make the mind and body better using the mind and body. Many strands of this modern postural yoga do come from India, and many strands come from the West. And in fact, because this is a tradition of experiment, there are new innovations happening right now. And if you look at the contemporary stuff that John Friend is doing with his bent bow yoga position body with a curvy spine and whatnot, you can see there are people making huge innovations to this day in different ways to do yoga. So responsibly, we must acknowledge the Indian roots of yoga, but we must not take modern postural yoga as being inherently Indic. We cannot create or perpetuate false ideals of India. Modern postural yoga is 150 years old, and it was started by Indians. And it's not what yogis were doing 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. People who were called yogis are doing all sorts of different things, but they weren't doing bendy bodies in sequences with breath. So acknowledging the roots of yoga means not just studying the Indian traditions, but we also need to look at Western physical culture traditions, such as ling gymnastics, bodybuilding, aerobics, and so forth. So we have to understand the Western physical culture traditions and also the occult traditions of new thought, think positively and grow wealthy, new age, that we are dawning in a new age of time, and neo-Hinduism. So there are all these sort of occult thought structures or secret thought structures that are found and are perpetuated by people doing yoga. Ultimately, we must challenge yoga, always. We think for the most part that yoga is good for us, and some scientific studies bear this out. We also must challenge non-scientific claims about yoga as being the solution for everything. If you have diabetes, like I do, insulin saves you. Yoga doesn't save you. And we must also remember that yoga teachers and innovators, for the most part, are not doctors. So in practicing yoga, we have to be careful. We have to be concerned that the yoga might actually hurt us. And there's a growing body of literature that shows that people get injured in yoga, especially in hot yoga, that Bikram style hot yoga. And there's a pretty great set of research that shows that anybody that does Ashtanga yoga in the Pattabhi Jois tradition is going to get injured, and those injuries will last more than a month. It happens. You get injuries. Yoga is not perfectly safe. Furthermore, we must challenge the authority claimed by gurus. We must question the reliance of lineage as authority. Just because a guru says it doesn't mean it's true. Now, we read elsewhere that one Indian said, I can't remember who said this, said that when teaching in the, it's Swami Nityananda. He said, when teaching Indians, they will accept, half of what you say is being true. Maybe. But when teaching Westerners, they look at the guru and they see the guru and they think that the guru is so grand and they take all of the Indian context so literally, they just adapt and accept 100% of everything that the guru does as being true. Indians are a lot more sketchy about gurus. So we must challenge the authority of gurus. We must question the reliance of lineage on authenticity. We also must look at how yoga is being commodified and how that brand of yoga seeks to sell us more stuff in the wellness industry and in the fitness industry. We must be careful to see how capitalism and neoliberalism is packaging yoga for consumption and encouraging great consumption and greater consumption through its depiction of yoga. The yoga brand is designed to do one thing, not make your body lean, but to sell you more yoga crap or more yoga classes. So be careful about the consumerist understanding of yoga. We also must be aware of race in yoga, not just Indians and white people, but how all people are integrated into yoga. That all people, not just skinny white ladies, should have access to yoga and yoga teachings. On that, we must always be aware of gender in yoga and be aware of the ways that Indic yoga was thought to be thoroughly male, and in the West has become a site of health and wellness for women. Furthermore, and I know I'm sticking on this one, furthermore, there's a pairing of yoga and female desirability. So the connection of yoga and female sexual desirability or even sexual availability. So these are some of my big concerns about yoga, and these are the takeaways I want you to take the class. It's been real, y'all. I always get sad at the end of class. I'm just getting to know all you. You're just getting to know me, and we're off. So have wonderful lives. Do yoga. Don't trust gurus. Walk in beauty. Love harder. Find a way to be happy. And if you find anything that makes you happy and it doesn't hurt other people, hold on to it for dear life. May you live long. May you live well. May you fulfill your wills in this world. It's been real. I'm Dr. Ulrich, and I'm signing off. Bye-bye.